Recent subscribers and viewers of the channel will know I'm a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda. All the games hold a dear place in my heart to the point where I did a review retrospective on the first 4 games to shamelessly plug those videos in. So in June, when Nintendo announced the next installment of the Zelda series, being Echoes of Wisdom, and that for the first time in a mainline Zelda game, Princess Zelda will be the main protagonist, making the franchise's title appropriate for the first time. And given that Princess Peach got her own game recently, and the Zelda series is nearly 40 years old, I think we can all agree it's about time. Alongside the fact that Echoes of Wisdom would be a 2D Zelda game, in a time where it felt like 2D Zelda was being pushed aside in favor of the open-air 3D games. Suffice to say, I was genuinely excited not only because 2D Zelda was coming back, but curious as to how Echoes of Wisdom would approach its gameplay, blending the open world of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but how it would also, if at all, incorporate elements of the traditional Zelda design. Eventually, after the initial trailer was released and we entered September, more gameplay was shown demonstrating how Echoes of Wisdom would play, with its main attraction being the Echoes mechanic and exploration. And to be honest, from what they showed, Echoes of Wisdom was shaping up to be a fun, bite-sized Zelda game that didn't need to be as big as Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I don't know how long this game is for context. This video delves into my initial impressions. As of now, I'm 2 hours in, and I've completed the intro and beaten the first dungeon. I just wanted to give my initial thoughts of the game, that way you know my mentality going into it. By the way, this video will have spoilers for the first 2 hours, so you've been warned. So not to waste any time, once you start up the game, Echoes of Wisdom throws you into the action as you play as Link mounting his rescue of Princess Zelda. For what it's worth, the intro is great, taking a page from A Link to the Past and throwing you straight into the game. But also Tears of the Kingdom, with Link being fully powered up with max heart containers and equipment. Imagine if you played Ocarina of Time and began the game as adult Link, and right before you begin the final boss, the game goes back in time and you play as child Link. To be fair, it's not one of those how did we end up here intros, because Echoes of Wisdom's intro is more like the final act of a typical Zelda game. Either way, the intro is meant to teach you the basic controls, and let me give my first major compliment, I'm so glad we have 360 movement in this game, because I did not like the 8-directional movement in Link's Awakening. And yeah, I know that's how it's controlled in the Game Boy, but when we have games like A Link Between Worlds, which in my opinion is the gold standard for 2D Zelda controls, I'm just glad Echoes of Wisdom learned from that game's example. Now, to my knowledge, I don't remember if this was shown in the trailers, but either way, Z targeting now makes its debut in 2D Zelda, and I wholeheartedly welcome this change, because when locked on, Link will automatically put a shield up, allowing you to be more defensive or properly position yourself against enemies. Link also has access to his bombs and arrows, which are funnily enough the fully upgraded variants from A Link Between Worlds, which is pretty neat. All of this won't matter in a moment, but I bring this up because if this is the new standard for 2D Zelda, I'm looking forward to what the future holds. Eventually, Link will make his way to Zelda, guarded by Ganon, and after an easy boss fight, Ganon will mutter that this is exactly what he wants. And as Link approaches Zelda, he's sucked into the rift, not before firing an arrow at Zelda's crystal. From this point onwards, you now formally take control of Zelda, shattering her crystal in an utmost dramatic fashion. Zelda then grabs Link's cloak, which is when we find out that this marks the first meeting between this version of Link and Zelda, since when she picks up his cloak, Zelda refers to Link as the Green Swordsman, debunking the fan theories that this game is set after Link's Awakening. Zelda at the very least adapts Link's style of holding up items. However, the moment is interrupted when the rift begins to expand, beginning an escape sequence with Zelda managing to escape. To compare Echoes of Wisdom's intro to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I really like this game's opening. Definitely more than Tears of the Kingdom's, but still think Breath of the Wild wins in the end though. However, like I said, what makes the intro great is that it's the final act of a normal Zelda game. The transition from playing as Link to then playing as Zelda was done in an effortless fashion. And of course, the shot of the game panning out to a view of Hyrule with the game's logo appearing was great as well, and I think it's safe to say this is going to be a new trope in this series. Once you return to Hyrule Castletown, Zelda is given a royal welcome, but your real goal is to return to the castle and speak to the king. You can go straight to the throne room, but I think after being missing for a week, Zelda was gone for a week, which I can only imagine must have been horrible. I think Zelda deserves a nap and to feed her pet cat. But once we meet the king, Zelda explains what happened, and with Zelda being the main lead, she now takes on the role of the silent protagonist. She does speak, but we don't hear what she says, and whenever they do this, I always like to interpret what they're saying by coming up with dialogue in my head. I don't know, it's a habit I have. However, ultimately it backfires on her when a rift appears, kidnapping the king, creating a doppelganger of him, and the king, quote-unquote, orders the guards to imprison her in the dungeons. I don't mind the fact that Zelda in this game is a silent protagonist. I mean, she's spoken throughout the entire series, but with Link missing, Zelda's now adapted Link's tendencies, including his pot smashing. After getting locked up, Zelda meets Tri, the mysterious light she saw earlier, and from there he gives her the Tri-Rod. Now with the Tri-Rod in hand, Zelda can begin using its Echo ability to create replicas of the glowing objects she sees. I think a lot of people can say this is where we were the most intrigued by when Echoes of Wisdom was first announced. Because we're not playing the Sword and Shield of Link, Zelda will have to use her wisdom to create echoes of objects to help her overcome enemies and solve puzzles. As an idea and from what I've played, I'm genuinely enjoying the Echoes mechanic because it opens up creative ways to solve puzzles. Whether it's creating a set of stairs using a table or a bridge of beds to obtain a heart piece, every obstacle I've encountered requires me to plan my path ahead with the echoes I currently have. It's like Echoes of Wisdom is packed with a bunch of mini puzzles, and how you solve them is limited to your creativity. Now at the start of the game, you're limited to a set of very basic echoes, but I guarantee you that previous statement will hold true once I start getting the endgame echoes. The variety of echoes I got in just the first 2 hours alone makes me excited to see more of what the game has in store. There are echoes that you can use to reach higher ledges, an echo that'll create an army of keys that can strike enemies from above, or one that can be used to distract enemies. You do have a limited number of echoes, but by holding down the right trigger, you can reset all of them. And when you reach the total amount of echoes you can spawn in, Zelda will respawn the oldest one first and go down the list. From what it looks like, by completing a dungeon, you gain an increase to your total echoes, so I can only imagine the army of moblins you can spawn in at the end of the game. It feels like when designing the levels, the developers carefully considered how the echoes could complement the gameplay. This is shown especially well in the intro when you have to escape Hyrule Castle, having to learn the different types of echoes and use them to avoid the guards. A simple and effective way to learn the mechanics. I'm glad Echoes of Wisdom decided not to use a Great Plateau or Great Sky Island tutorial, plopping you in the middle of a giant open area, and instead weaving the tutorial into the story. Once reunited with Impa and grabbing a change of clothes, Zelda escapes Hyrule Castle and enters the Overworld proper. Now this right here is what I was most looking forward to. How would Echoes of Wisdom in a post-Breath of the Wild world adapt the Overworld? Well, for starters, one of the changes made with Echoes of Wisdom is the reintroduction of heart containers. And after playing the open-air 3D games, I am so glad heart containers are back. I do like the shrines in the previous games, but to save my point for when I do those games one day, the amount of Raru's blessings you'll encounter near the end of the game starts to highlight cracks in the armor. So seeing heart containers return and having you use echoes to obtain them calls back to what makes getting them so great in Zelda, using your tools to solve the puzzle and being rewarded for it. During my first session, I managed to complete my first set. 3 were found by exploring and 1 was bought in a shop. I imagine some will be found in the wild while others might be tied to side quests. As far as how you explore the overworld, I was surprised at how Echoes of Wisdom seemed to be blending in linear and non-linear gameplay similar to the previous Zelda titles. Instead of going down the path the game intended, I entered a cave and at the end I found a bottle inside a chest. This is the type of stuff I like to see in a Zelda game. I can go off the beaten path and find a cave with secrets inside, and the same thing happens again when another cave has a heart container inside. End of the day, taking those bits of exploration from previous Zelda games. That's not to say a lot of the more recent mechanics haven't made their way into Echoes of Wisdom, because the food and equipment make a return. The ingredients you find are meant to be mixed into smoothies, except I haven't gone that far, and when ingested, they only heal small amounts of health. But I am curious to see what kind of bonuses I can get depending on the smoothies I make. As for the equipment, oddly enough, it's most similar to the Oracle games, which when equipped can offer different bonuses. I only found 1 in the first dungeon, but the fact that rings are making a return is a mechanic I welcome with open arms. Really, from what I've gathered, Echoes of Wisdom is taking the best of previous Zelda games and mixing it with the mechanics of the newer games, and if implemented well, can benefit the series. Besides that, I also have to mention how fantastic the art style for Echoes of Wisdom is. The toy art style which it's referred to meshes really well with the characters and aesthetic of Zelda, making every environment look fantastic. I'm definitely glad this art style wasn't just used for Link's Awakening, and now it's able to make Hyrule look fantastic and not just Koholint Island. One of the things I absolutely wanted addressed from Link's Awakening was the performance issues, and for some of you this could be the nail in the coffin as to buying the game, because during my play session, I noticed a bit of stuttering when in the overworld, specifically in the overworld, because when inside buildings or dungeons, the game ran very smoothly. I don't know the technical details of why stuff like this happens. Maybe it's an engine problem as a result of trying to capture the art style or something else, but I hope this is addressed in an optimization patch, because I want it to be known to people who are watching and considering buying Echoes of Wisdom. To get back on topic, the other piece of gameplay you'll see are the numerous rifts around Hyrule. Eventually, you'll proceed through the main quest and end up traveling inside the world inside the rift, the Still World. First off, when this was shown off, I instantly thought of the distortion dimension from Pokemon Platinum, mainly due to its appearance. The trailers only gave surface level details as to what the Still World is and what you'll be doing inside it, so during my session, I was interested in seeing what it had in store. From what I've gathered, the Still World is meant to serve as an area you'll be exploring to find the dungeon corresponding with the region you're in. I thought it was going to be like the depths from Tears of the Kingdom, but it looks like that's not the case. When heading to the first dungeon, the path towards the dungeon was very linear, only having 2 moments where I could go off and explore. The echoes are still used to navigate over the distorted land, and I can only imagine how complicated the level design will get the further in the game I go. But I'll reiterate again, exploring the Still World is about finding where the dungeon is located, and to be honest, that's totally fine, because it didn't need to be the depths. In fact, I didn't want it to be the depths, and I'm looking forward to what's in store for the later dungeons. Dungeons, speaking of being the main attraction, besides the overworld, the dungeons were also a big component I was worried about when beginning Echoes of Wisdom, because since Breath of the Wild, the dungeons have had a drop in quality. Of course, that's due to the fact that more effort was put into the open world, but dungeons are a core aspect of the Zelda experience, and since Echoes of Wisdom is being set up as a smaller game, then the question arises, that being, can Nintendo make good dungeons with some of the open-air mechanics? Every first dungeon in a Zelda game is meant to set the bar for the rest of the dungeons, and ever since Tears of the Kingdom, a problem arose where dungeons could be cheesed with the hover bike strategy. Now, I understand that's the type of sacrifice you make when you give the player that type of freedom, but to get back to Echoes of Wisdom, the question is, how does the echoes impact dungeon design and progression? This all comes from the first dungeon, but there was never a case where I could have used the echoes to cheese a puzzle. Instead, it was about analyzing my environment and using Zelda's abilities to solve the puzzle, like using Bind to place this statue on the button, or using echoes to get a treasure chest. The puzzles themselves were not very complicated, but it still keeps true to the antithesis of puzzles in previous games, and to the theme of using echoes. At the halfway point, you'll fight a mini-boss against Link, and a really cool detail is if you pay attention to the music, it sounds like an evil corrupted version of the main Zelda theme. Link fights like he usually does, but once he's defeated, he drops his sword, unlocking the Sword Fighter form, allowing Zelda to channel the energy within the sword, letting her adopt Link's moves for a short period. When activated, this form was a ton of fun to use, especially against the boss fight and regular enemies, but it seems like it's best suited for harder enemies like Darknuts. Later on, you can upgrade the sword, so that's something I'll be on the lookout for. As for the rest of the dungeon is very linear, but does bring back small keys as well as the boss key, believe it or not. The last half is about finding the keys to unlock a corresponding door to eventually make your way to the boss key. Linearity in Zelda dungeons is never a bad thing because, if anything, the southern ruins remind me of the Eastern Palace from A Link to the Past. But in the case of Echoes of Wisdom, the southern ruins do a fine job demonstrating how dungeons will work in this game. I just hope the rest of the dungeons become more non-linear, having you often strategize with your echoes. However, what I really enjoyed the most from the dungeon was actually the boss fight. Against Seismic Talist, I loved how the boss constantly made me change my strategy to fit where the boss's weakness was. When his weak point was on his bottom, I used the Moblin to distract him while throwing boulders at him, and once he was down and the damage phase began, I unleashed a flurry of sword attacks. However, in his next phase, I loved how I had to change my strategy to attack his new weak point, so I switched to using keys and waiting for the boss to do his ground pound attack. One thing I didn't mention up until now is that when Z-targeting an enemy, your enemy echoes will focus their attention to your desired target. One moment you can be very aggressive with your attacks, and the next you have to keep your distance and let the echoes do damage, like when the boss entered his last stand but the keys were dealing damage, while I threw rocks at the boss's head. After being defeated, Tri and his friends will heal the rift, and you're rewarded with a heart container. I know I haven't mentioned Tri since we met him, but it looks like he's a light spirit from the Still World and his duty is to heal rifts. Besides that, that's all we know. I had a personal theory that Tri was Link's spirit guiding Zelda on her hero's journey, but it looks like my theory was wrong. Later on, after you speak to Luberry, you can read his diary and find out more about this game's Link. And I like how Echoes of Wisdom is taking the time to give a backstory to this iteration of Link. You find out he's from Southern Village, and when he was lost in the Still World during an early attack, he managed to escape at the cost of his voice. Blueberry also confirms the sword Link had was made by him, called the Sword of Might. Once you meet him and complete the quest, the game opens up, allowing you to head to Jabula Waters or Gerudo Desert. But by that point, I reached the end of my session. So after all I've said, what do I initially think of Echoes of Wisdom? Well, I'm glad the Echoes have made a strong initial impression. The game so far has done a good job meshing the elements of new and old Zelda design, and finally getting to play as Princess Zelda. But do I recommend you buy Echoes of Wisdom right now? If you're like me and you're a diehard Zelda fan, you've probably already bought the game, and with good reason, because there's a lot of good ideas in this game. That's why I took the time to analyze my first impressions of this game, and because I won't lie, I like talking about Zelda. However, given that I noticed some of the same performance issues from Link's Awakening, I think that right there might be a good reason for you to wait and hope Nintendo releases an optimization patch. As for the casual fans, don't feel any pressure to play this game. You can leave it in your backlog and play it when the time's right. I guarantee you everything I've said in this video is bound to change. The purpose of this video was to go over my initial impressions, and I know that once I beat the game, I'll have the information needed to come to my own conclusions. For now, I'm going to stop right there. So with that being said, thank you for watching, and take care.